Hello, and welcome back to Things I Want My Kids to Know with me, Ted Bradshaw. Today, we're going to talk about quite a big topic, I think, which is grief, loss, and what makes complex grief. This, I think, is quite a complicated subject, which is a shame in a lot of ways, because if there's one thing that we're pretty much guaranteed to experience during our lifetime, it is loss. It is grief. We are going to lose people. When I think about the title of this show, Things I Want My Kids to Know, my kids are going to lose people. One day they're going to lose me. And I really wanted to talk about this, but I could feel myself being hesitant to cover this subject. The reason we're here today, I think, is A, it's been on my mind for a while, but B, I was asked about it. Somebody asked, could you cover this? And I was maybe a little bit reluctant to, because part of me was afraid of getting it wrong. I was afraid of, what if I cover something here that, or say something here that doesn't chime with somebody's experience, and it makes them, I don't know, doubt their own view of things. Even as I'm saying that out loud, there's two things I want to say about that. A, I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think that is going to be the case. And I feel okay about it. And B, I think maybe this is a little bit of an indication of just how uncomfortable we can be talking about grief and loss, or sitting with somebody who has lost somebody who's going through the process of grief. We can feel really uncomfortable with that. I'm hoping that this bit of time today will just introduce a few ways of thinking about it and understanding it, and maybe get across the idea of why we don't have to have anything kind of clever to say or do for ourselves or for somebody else when loss is being experienced, when grief is being experienced. We don't have to have anything clever to say. We don't have to get it or understand it. We just have to know what's going to be useful. And sometimes all that is useful is sitting with that person and letting them feel what they feel. No more clever than that, really. I think that's probably another reason why it can be uncomfortable for us as people, is because typically when somebody's in pain, we want to fix it. So we're looking for, how can I be helpful? How can I help you feel better? But I'm hoping through the explanations today, you can see why that isn't always useful, and why you can take the pressure off yourself to feel like you need to do that, actually. So let's first of all talk about how grief, this seems like a daft thing to say, tends to go, because tends to go is already kind of daft, because there isn't one way. There isn't one path that you're going to follow that, okay, this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. But I think in order to talk about and help understand why some losses hit you harder or stick with you longer or push you to the ground harder than other ones do, it is helpful to talk about some of the factors that can be different. So first of all, this is not about there being some sort of hierarchy in terms of, right, if you lose this person in your life, you're allowed to grieve for this amount of months, whereas if it's this person, it's going to be longer or shorter. It's not as simple as that. But let's just talk about how it can go when it is reasonably uncomplicated. Even that's a problematic phrase, but we're going to stick with it. And I hope you'll understand what I mean by it by the time I'm done. So, what does moving through loss mean? What does moving through grief mean? Usually what we mean, I think, is not that the pain disappears, that you no longer miss that person, that you no longer feel sad that they are not here. I don't think that happens. Instead, maybe what most people would recognise is eventually there comes a time when it is still sad and you are still hit with the sadness of that. But it maybe doesn't dominate you quite as much. It isn't pushing you down to the floor and weighing heavily on you every single day or every moment of every single day. It is still there, but it's maybe not as dominant as it was. Not only that, but also that perhaps it becomes a little bit easier to spend time thinking about and speaking about the person that you've lost with some of the warmth or warm memories that you have of that person. You get to keep them. Maybe you can have a picture of them in your house, and when you look at it, it doesn't only bring overwhelming pain, it brings, do you remember that? Wasn't that lovely? Or weren't they a wonderful person in my life? And that you get to kind of reclaim that aspect of the person that you've lost, that maybe you lose in the first few months. That's not there anymore, because every time you think about them, all that's there is the pain. So kind of how does that happen? If I was to paint a picture of an example of grief that might move in that direction, I'm going to pick the example of a grandparent who was a really warm presence in your life, who you had an uncomplicated relationship with, who you loved, who loved you, and the way in which you lost them, the way in which they died, was kind of expected. You had time to kind of rehearse it in your head. So grandparents, that's often the case. You often know that they're not going to be here one day. And you've rehearsed it almost in your mind. You've thought about how that's going to go, and you know that's how it's going to go. And that maybe it happens in a way that isn't particularly traumatic. It's always, again, that sounds daft because it's always somewhat traumatic, I think, or somewhat painful. But maybe if they go as peacefully as is possible, then maybe it is easier to allow yourself, when you think of that person and the loss, to feel sad that they are no longer here. It doesn't feel strange that you're feeling that way. You know what you're feeling is completely reasonable because you love them and they're not here anymore. You don't have to have a go at yourself about that. You don't feel like you're being strange. So what you are allowed to do is talk about and think about that person, and you are allowed to be sad. And in doing that, in allowing that, your brain is allowed to sort of process the loss. That would be a quite clinical way of putting it. Your brain is allowed to process the loss. It is allowed to chew over it, and through allowing yourself the sadness. And in doing so, that process starts to happen that eventually, when a reminder comes up of that person, the sadness is there, but it becomes less intense. It becomes, maybe not every single moment is less intense, but maybe it's less intense and lasts a little less long. It's not great English, but let's go with that. It's shorter, or it's less intense, it's less dominant. It is through thinking about, speaking about, and allowing the sadness that you are working through to a point where actually that's less intense, and you get to spend a bit more time with the warm memories that you feel. Sometimes they'll come hand in hand. It's more about addressing a balance. So it's kind of at the beginning, perhaps it's the pain just completely dominates and you don't get to have any of the warm memories, or they're hard, they're fleeting. And the more you process it and the sadness gets less intense, it balances out and you are allowed access to the warmth as well. If that's how it goes when it's as straightforward as it can be, let's have a think about what makes it more likely to be stuck. Or the word, clumsy word we sometimes use, I think, is complex. Even stuck is clumsy as well, I'd say. And I think there are two main ways in which I would describe that. So one is when there's something that adds to the pain. And the second is if there is something that stops the process of allowing yourself to feel the pain. So let's first of all think about some of the things that might make it even more painful. So sometimes when it's what that person means to you, just simply what they mean to you. Somebody that means more to you is going to hurt more. Simple as that, really. Sometimes it's not only the person themselves, but it's what that person's loss means to you and the rest of your life. So maybe if the person that you lose means that you also lose a particular role, the role of a grandchild, the role of a child, the role of a partner, the role of a parent, the role of a best friend. And sometimes that leaves this huge gap, not only in your life, but in your purpose. Like, what am I? What am I supposed to do now? It might not be as clear as that in your head, but maybe that might be how it feels. It feels lost, maybe, adrift. Sometimes it means that you've got a loss of your future. And what I mean by that is, again, like if we take the example of a partner, if you lose a partner, you had this kind of future laid out in front of you. Sometimes, in your private moments, you would daydream about retirement and what you do together, or what might happen for the two of you as you get older. And if you lose that partner, suddenly this path that was laid out in front of you, or even if it's a rough path, now there's just this void. It's just this void. And it takes a lot of time to be able to quite literally work out, what is my life now? What is my future? And to begin with, you might not be able to see a future. Before, this path was laid out in front of me, and it's like it's been whipped away, and there's just this chasm. So feeling lost or unsure as to where to go and finding it hard to see a future would be a completely reasonable way to feel. I want to talk a little bit here about sometimes with loss, something that gets in our way of processing it in a healthy way. Again, this clumsy word. I don't know if there's a healthy or unhealthy is a helpful thing to say, but when there's a loss that perhaps intellectually you don't understand as well, so like from the surface or from stepping back, it may be we've told ourselves that we shouldn't feel it as much. A classic example, a really common example, I think, is miscarriage. So when you lose a pregnancy, when you lose a baby that you were going to have, sometimes what I hear from people is a confusion or a frustration with themselves that they're feeling it as a huge loss of a person. And what I would say is, of course it's like that. Of course it's like that. Actually, when you think about it, when you're pregnant, when your partner's pregnant, you imagine, you picture it. I really remember when my wife was pregnant with our first baby, I really remember finding myself imagining a speech at her wedding. I didn't even know she was a girl, but imagining these various people that they might become, the future again, the relationship that I was going to have, the fact that I was going to become a dad, the fact that it would change me, or with a second pregnancy or a third, what that will mean for our family dynamic and the siblings. You lose that. You lose the person they were going to become. And that's huge. That's huge. How do you find what your life is going to look like now? How do you piece together, hold on, I had it laid out, and that's just been completely taken apart. Like, you'd stacked up a load of wooden blocks into a lovely path, and somebody just come and kicked it over. And where do I even begin again? Can I begin again? Actually, I want to just circle back to the loss of role again. There's something that's occurred to me here that we didn't cover, which is caring role. So sometimes if you've been a carer for somebody, if they've been ill for a long time, when they eventually die, it can be one of the really difficult things, can be, that was my life. That was my focus for so long, that there's this kind of loss of purpose. There's this loss of purpose, actually. What is my life now that I'm not doing that? And sometimes also that means that your own life changed. So what your life was before you became a carer changed. And so you have lost a period of time in a way. Maybe friendships have fallen by the wayside. Maybe work or relationships have suffered. So maybe you've lost that too. And then it's only when it's done that it feels like maybe starting again. Other things that can make it really complicated, I think, or can make it really difficult to do what, the collective wisdom will say, which is allow yourself to feel the sadness, allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to think about and talk about that person, is when there are intense and complicated feelings when that memory comes up. So some of the things might be, if you are angry, maybe you might be angry with the world because it's unfair how it happened, when it happened, that it happened. Maybe you're angry with the person that you've lost. Maybe because of how it happened, maybe because of the relationship that you had or didn't have. While we're on that, actually, the relationship that you didn't have can be quite a big part of grieving sometimes. So when you lose somebody, if you had a relationship that was a bit complicated, sometimes it's only when they're gone that you get to really feel the grief for what you missed out on or what it wasn't. And that can feel like a hard thing to maybe explain to other people. People tend to get, you've lost somebody, you're sad. But does everybody understand if you try and explain that some of the sadness is that maybe I'm not as sad about losing them as I am feeling sad about what it wasn't and what we didn't have together? But again, I think the answer, as if there's one answer, is being permissive, allowing yourself to feel what you feel is the only way through, really. It's the only way a brain gets to be able to churn it through and find some way of making some sense of it. Even if that sense is, that is sad. You're not being weird for feeling sad or angry or disappointed or upset or let down. It might be anger at healthcare systems if they were let down, or if the way in which you lost this person was somebody else's doing in some way. It might be that there's guilt about what you did or did not do or say. Whether you missed something, whether you wish you'd said something. There might be guilt. There might be shame. Maybe shame about, again, how the relationship was, or maybe about how you feel. Because maybe if you don't feel as sad, or maybe if part of you feels relieved, then maybe that is a really shameful thing. It feels shameful to you. And therefore you don't allow yourself to feel what you feel because you can't bear it. Or sometimes a really complicated thing is if it happened in a very traumatic way. And I would say that most losses happen in a traumatic way, but we expect them not to be because of this idea that, well, everybody experiences loss. This is a fundamental part of life, that people will die, we will lose people. So therefore you shouldn't be bothered by it. Despite the fact that, hold on, well, I had to hold their hand, and maybe that was a good thing that I held their hand. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't traumatic. Sometimes you will see the person that you have lost in a way you've never seen them before. Maybe you see them in pain. Maybe it's sudden. If it's something like a miscarriage, maybe the way in which that happens is really traumatic. If it's traumatic and every time you think about that loss, what you feel is fear, you're back in that moment where it's happening and it's overwhelming and it's fearful, that is going to make you want to run away from that memory. Completely understandably. But what that means is you can't get out the memory. So you're not allowed to have pictures up around the house. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to be reminded of it because it's too painful, so I can't. And therefore it just stays as it is. It stays stuck. I hope those are useful to just kind of think about the kinds of things that might help us understand when it becomes stuck, for want of a better word, or why it might weigh you down, or why, okay, I feel sad, but I don't only feel sad, I feel depressed, I feel flat, I feel like I can't enjoy things. What's going on there? I've been feeling this way for months. What's happening? Maybe understanding that if it's taken out your ability to see a future, that might help you understand that a little bit more. Maybe if you can allow yourself to see that it is complicated and that it's hard for you to allow yourself to feel the anger, or that you can see that you do have this sort of trauma response, that maybe that allows you to go a bit easier on yourself. The things that I would say about dealing with these things, responding and helping yourself, is allowing yourself to feel what you feel. Now, that's easy to say, right? But what if the feelings are overwhelmingly painful? Why would you want to do that? And there is a balance, I think, between, okay, I need to allow myself to feel it, because otherwise I can't process it. But it's so overwhelming that it knocks me out for days sometimes. And I think the other thing I'd say is it is okay to want to avoid it sometimes. You're not cheating or failing or not doing the right thing if sometimes what you want is just something that's just going to make it all go away for a bit. That might mean that you do sort of reasonably mindless activities or mindful activities. So it might be sort of endless. You get hooked on crosswords or particular TV shows or whatever, because while you do that, you can put it down for a while. Sometimes there's guilt and shame in not feeling it. So if you go out and have a nice time with somebody and you forget about the grief for a while, you might feel guilty about it or ashamed. And that can stop you doing things that are necessary for you to kind of feel okay sometimes, to have a chance of feeling okay. It's saying it is all right to put it down sometimes, and it's important to allow yourself time to think about and feel your feelings. It's both. If there's trauma involved, don't do it on your own. Don't do it on your own. In fact, if any of this is going on for you, you don't have to do it on your own. Talk to somebody. There is no shame in that. There is only goodness. There is only bravery in going to speak to somebody else about what's going on. And if you are trying to help yourself or somebody else, the key thing that I'd want anybody to know is when somebody is grieving and feeling what they're feeling, sometimes the worst thing you can do is try and fix it. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is take the responsibility off you and off the person you are trying to help for them to feel better. You don't have to make them feel better. You can let go of that responsibility. You can say and show them you can feel however you want to feel here. You can tell me about that person. Maybe it's helpful for them to know, look, sometimes I don't know whether to mention that person's name because I don't know how you're feeling and whether you want to go there today. But equally, it's painful to know that it's so painful when you've lost somebody that people skirt around using their name. And we do that for a good reason, because we don't want to cause pain, but you're not causing pain. The pain is there. And sometimes it's more painful that people avoid it. So name it. Say, I'd love to ask you how you're doing each time. Do you want me to do that? Or is it annoying sometimes? Or maybe it's better to say, I'd love to ask you how you're doing, and you can be as honest with me or as not honest with me as you like. And that is okay. And just let them feel their feelings. For you, if it's you, if you're finding this from other people, that it's difficult to sit with other people and you're trying to do that because you know it's the right thing, but the things you're getting from other people aren't very helpful. They seem to want to push you to feel good. You can say, if you want, if they're people you trust, I don't need you to fix it. I'd like to be able to just talk about them every now and then. Is that okay? Can you handle that? Can I ask you to just sit with me until I'm done? You don't have to fix it. It's okay. Those are the things I wanted to say today. I hope they're helpful. I know it's not everything. I'm really glad I've spoken about it. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.